Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We live streamed after the games on Tuesday, and we had tons of fun. Great questions, great interactions. It was really a blast, if you want me to be honest. If you want to see more content like this from us, let us know down below in the comments. Before we get started, as per usual, don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the OBT Podcast.
So I guess we'll kick it off with Wednesday's games. So we're not necessarily going to talk too much about the games prior to that because we did our live stream. So if you want our thoughts on a lot of those games, you can go check that out. The VOD is still there.
Yeah.
So just go to the live section. So we'll start with Knicks Cavs, game 5 elimination game. So the Knicks win in 5. So ending the Cavs season 106-95. So obviously, with the Knicks led by Jalen Brunson, 23 points, 4 assists, 2 steals, 8 of 22 from the field, 2 of 6 from 3. So obviously, I think the story is that we were definitely way off on this series. I think we both thought that the Cavs would win the series.
Yeah.
Even though I did give the Knicks a decent amount of respect, and said that it was probably going to be a long series and that there was a world where they could win. I just thought the Cavs were better, but after watching this series, just watching it play out, I was definitely off on that. The Knicks are definitely better.
Yeah.
Just going into it, kind of one of the things that I mentioned about the Cavs was that their lack of wing depth was probably going to hurt them, and it just was kind of a matter of when it was going to happen, and it happened in the first round. So RJ Barrett, just want to give a shout out to him.
Yeah. Big shout
Obviously
out.
his name has been coming up a lot, right? Because over the course of the offseason, we know he was the big name that was mentioned in a potential Donovan Mitchell Knicks trade, but he played great in this series, especially to close it out in the last few games, right? I mean, finished this game with 21 and 4, 2 of 4 from 3, 7 of 13 from the field. The lack of wings for Cleveland made it so that way he was kind of able to just do whatever he wanted. And when he got it going, it was really hard for Cleveland to really do a whole lot. Obviously you had other guys that played really well as too. Brunson obviously is the star. Quickly, right, started the series off kind of slow, but got better. Never really was efficient, but
Yeah.
obviously he's a big part of their team. Josh Hart. I think the biggest thing is also just in general, the Knicks have more guys that they can kind of go to, that they can trust, that they can rely on. And I think the Cavs, you could just see it's a young team, and Mobley, for as good as he is defensively, he's still a pretty raw player on offense. Um,
Yes.
he had his moments in the series, but overall, the two big lineup just wasn't that ideal. Um, but then you also kind of have to get into, I think this was Donovan Mitchell's probably his worst playoff series. Outside of last year's, where it just felt like that the team just kind of just gave up, right?
Mm-hmm.
This one was one where I think where they were all trying, just didn't play well. Had a lot of really inefficient performances. The Knicks did a really good job guarding him. It felt like that, the Cavs couldn't really figure out whether or not, they wanted Mitchell or Garland, to kind of control a lot of the
Right.
offense. So it just kind of felt like a lot of your turn, my turn, which doesn't always work. But just in general, I just want to give a lot of credit to the Knicks because you know, I thought it would be a close series, and it really wasn't. I mean, the Knicks won in 5, and most of the games they won, relatively handedly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts pretty much so far from what you've
Yeah.
seen over the course of this series?
This was a wild series for me because, like you said, our pick was Cleveland coming out of this in, a lengthier series, but, it was kind of short and sweet, to be honest. But, this begs the question for me mainly on Cleveland because, I just don't know what to expect with the Knicks. They've surprised me, and I'm sure they're probably going to surprise me again. It honestly, like, that's what I think is probably going to happen. They're going to surprise a lot of people. But, with the Cavs, that just begs the question, can Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland share that backcourt in the playoffs? Because in the regular season, like, it didn't look this bad. There were questions, but it did not look, as horrendous as it did.
They were a 50-win team.
Exactly. Like, this is rough. So, and then, I also have questions about Jared Allen. Like, he's kind of getting bullied out there by Mitchell Robinson a lot of this series, and Julius Randle really wasn't even a main factor in this series if
Oh,
you really think about it. So, New York probably could have done this even quicker if Randle was playing at the level that we know he can play at. But there's just a lot of questions with this Cleveland team. How deep are they? How far can they really go? And, I think the main issue is where is like most of their offense going to come from? Because it doesn't look like it's coming from Mobley right now. Jared Allen, it's definitely not coming from. Karis LeVert, he's very streaky. Donovan Mitchell, he struggled this series immensely. So did Garland. So it's like, if nobody's hot, this team looks like they're going to have some issues. So, I think they've got to build some depth. But, series wise, this was very disappointing for me because, like I said, I was pretty high on the Cavs. Big Darius Garland fan, huge Donovan Mitchell fan. So hate to see these guys go out sad. But like you said, credit to New York because they showed out and, shocked the world basically.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I'll kind of touch up on the Cavs for a little bit and then move
Sure.
on back to the Knicks. And, just kind of like, I just wonder what they do. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to pay Mobley eventually, right? You're already paying Garland, you're already
Yes.
paying Mitchell, you're already paying Allen. And you got to find some other guys to help. They need that wing. But I don't know how they're going to be able to get it. They also, miss a backup big. That Kevin Love situation, I just think is so strange
Yeah,
because he was playing well for them. I know he hurt his hand, right? So his level of play slipped. But it just felt like that they really could have used another big out there
for
because it
sure.
just felt like Mobley and Allen together, it just didn't work, and they were getting outplayed by the Knicks bigs. And that was kind of one of the X factors that we had talked about, along with R.J. Barrett, for the Knicks. So it just, I do wonder, like, with the coaching situation, some people
Great
think that
point.
the
Yeah.
staff didn't necessarily do that great of a job. I mean, for me, I just think that there were some limitations with the roster. I mean, I'm not saying the coaching was great, but
Yeah.
I also just think, like, it's just not having great options at the wing and not having any backup bigs just makes things kind of difficult. Um, obviously not to necessarily, let him off the hook, but
Hmm.
just in general, like it's just kind of disappointing because it feels like that the Cavs really just, kind of went out just kind of like with a whimper, sort of. I mean,
Yeah.
they were the higher seed, and I mean, not only did they lose, they lost in five. That's pretty rough. I mean, obviously it's not, the biggest failure in the world because I didn't necessarily look at them as a contender, but I thought
Right.
at least they would get past the first round.
Yeah.
But going back to the Knicks, I mean, you got to be pretty happy if you're a New York Knicks fan. I mean, this is a pretty big moment. I mean, this is the first series they've won in a decade, right since Carmelo was there.
Hmm.
And we're gonna get into it a little bit later, right? But obviously, with their next matchup, being a lot different than what we expected, right? I mean, there's a real path for the Knicks to, even make the conference finals, if things
Yeah.
continue, to go their way. So it's just kind of, awesome how Jalen Brunson, they signed him. It was kind of a polarizing deal, right? Because there were a lot of people who thought he was getting overpaid. But I mean, he's pretty much quieted everybody. And I think he's played, not only has he played well, I think he's played even beyond what most people thought. Because I
For
like Jalen
sure.
Brunson. I liked him in Dallas, but I didn't expect him to be as good as he's been, this season. He's been
Yeah.
even better. And I mean, just, if you're the Knicks, you got to be pleased, finally having a team, that not only you can root for, but actually, they're a good team.
Yeah. Can I
Um,
interject real
you know,
quick?
yeah,
Sorry, it's on. I didn't want you to like move on from Jalen Brunson because I had one thing to say about him. Like, for me, when he first came into the league, I thought he was going to be like, more like where Tyus Jones is.
yeah,
Like, more of a backup guy. A solid one that can control the floor and whatnot, get to his spots pretty easily. But he's emerged into a really like underrated superstar at this point. So credit to him, he's been balling out on a different level. So
yeah. And
huge
his
shout out.
game is just so unique from the guard spot
Yes,
because it's, relatively physical. He's not really that athletic, not super quick. He's just
right,
very skilled, very sound and fundamental. It's a really interesting game to watch. And
and it's
I
fun to
think it
watch
does,
too.
yeah. And I think it kind of fits, that Knicks team because you now have a guy that can kind of, settle things down and can kind of set up, the table so that way, you don't have to rely on Julius Randle to be,
Right.
really good because we know he kind of struggled against Atlanta, right, in that first playoff trip that he was in with the Knicks, right? And, he wasn't much of a factor this series.
Yeah,
But obviously now that you have Brunson, right, I mean, I think your ceiling is higher. So, just a really cool moment for New York, just New York sports fans in general, right? I know with football, I know with the big Rodgers trade, right?
yeah,
Obviously,
they're
just in
hyped up.
general, I'm sure it's a great time to be a New York sports fan.
Yeah, they've got a
Um,
lot to look forward to.
yeah. So moving on into the next game, Lakers Grizzlies game five. Grizzlies win 116-99 to keep their season alive in Memphis. Um, Pretty much the game. Yeah, we talked about it on the live stream. Pretty much, I expected the Grizzlies to win
Hmm.
this game largely just because they were at home, desperation game. You just kind of knew that, like, they needed to have a performance like this. and they needed a few guys to have bounce back performances. They got it. John Morant, obviously 31, 7 and 10.
Insane.
Yeah, Desmond Bain, 33, right? A much more efficient night than he had had the last few games. Got it right. Jaren Jackson Jr. got a solid game from him. Obviously, not much from Dylan Brooks, but Xavier Tillman, Santi Aldama gave him some decent minutes. So just in general, a much better performance out of a lot of these guys, right? And then you go to the Lakers. AD had a bounce back performance. LeBron, pretty bad performance in my opinion.
Very.
15 points, 5 of 17, 1 of 9 from three with 5 turnovers.
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
D'Angelo Russell, 4 for 11, 11 points, 10 assists. Had a stretch in the third where he played well, but outside of that, other than the passing, didn't really do a whole lot. Austin Reeves, not great. 17 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 4 of 13. Although it had a +5, the starters, interestingly enough, had for the most part pretty positive plus minuses. The difference for me really was the bench. I just thought the bench for the Lakers was just really bad.
Yeah.
You look at the bench guys: Rui Hachimura -18, Troy Brown
Hmm.
Jr. -26, Dennis Schroeder -20, Malik Beasley -23 in just 11 minutes, which is just evidence, just evident of how much he's been struggling. In the first half, it pretty much went how I thought it was going to go. I thought Memphis threw a pretty strong punch. The Lakers fell down early.
Yeah.
Despite LeBron playing pretty poorly, they were only down by 9. And then they quickly cut it to 1 in the third quarter, then fall back a couple of times, then get it back to 1. And then they, in my opinion, made a mistake where they took Anthony Davis out when they were going on a run, and it was a 1-point game, and they subbed him out for Troy Brown Jr. And the Lakers were just too small, and Memphis just ran it up, and I think it was like a 21-2 run,
Hmm.
right, pretty much to end the game. I thought like they ran it up to 8 before they subbed AD back in, so he only sat for like 90 seconds. So I think
Right.
they realized it was a mistake. But to me, that was the difference there, right? Because they could have come back and won. But just in general, right, Memphis closed the game out, did a much better job here than the last couple of games. Like I said, I thought this would probably go 6 or 7, depending, regardless of who won. But still, right, if you're Memphis, you got to be pleased with the performance just to keep the season alive because
Yes.
you don't want to lose at home. They're great at home. I believe they have the best home record in the NBA. So this
Hmm.
was pretty much to me a must-win game for Memphis. Obviously, I mean every game is a must-win for them because one more loss and they're done. So
Yeah. For me, 80 had a monster game in my opinion. I thought he played really well this game, but LeBron, he just came up short. I don't want to single it out, but when he doesn't play well, I feel like a lot of the other guys on this team don't play very well because you got to look at the X factors like Rui, Austin Reeves. They didn't play that great, and I feel like the Lakers locker room really responds to LeBron. So like I said, if he plays well, then I think normally they play well as well. And that's just what happens when you have a floor general. But I feel like with the Lakers also, like, they can get away with not being able to defend if their shots are going down, but if their shots aren't going down and they can't defend, then I think it's a hard ask for them to beat this team. So that's what it comes down to for me. And I predicted that the Lakers were gonna actually win this one. So this was a surprise to me, and I guess I didn't really factor in all the things going on. Like you said, the Lakers tend to take their foot off the gas. You said that during the live stream, I think, when they're when they have a lead or come off a win. I guess it's just what they do. But for this series, this is going to shape out to be one of the more interesting ones. I think a lot of people did have this game going or this series going pretty far. Like you said, 7 games, 6 games. So I'm rooting for Memphis. I hope Memphis can knock LA out. But we'll see because I don't know. Like, I'm still not impressed with this Memphis team. Like, I wasn't really high on them, coming into the playoffs, and I'm honestly still not because not a huge night in my opinion from them. I think they could have played better. I don't think this is the best basketball I've seen them play before. I'd like to see the 3-point shot be a little bit higher. And then, you also, it's just so weird because you want to see more from the surrounding guys, like, I feel like with Desmond Bain, like I know he's great because he's made a jump every year he's been in the league, but I think we have to play some more team basketball and share the ball. But at the same time, I understand it because they are running these starters with really heavy minutes, which is surprising. And shout out to Jaren Jackson Jr. I know he had 5 fouls, but I think he did a better job than in the regular season where it's like the guy is pretty much fouling out every game. So
yeah,
big shout out to him, even though he really couldn't contain AD. But everyone else, I thought he did a great job contesting at the rim. So, I'm looking forward to seeing the Grizzlies play again, and I hope they can take out the Lakers on this series. So
Yeah, it just kind of comes down to what happens in Game 6. Obviously,
yeah,
Lakers are going back home. Um, and just in general, it just kind of depends. Can Memphis win on the road, right? Memphis is one of the worst teams in the league on the road, right? They haven't won on the road against the Lakers yet. The Lakers took one in Memphis. So that's, game, right? Game 1 and game 4 were kind of the big factors in the
yeah, those
series.
are the keys.
Yeah, those were the keys because, if you're Memphis, you can't afford to lose, game 1 at home. And then obviously for the Lakers, you can't afford to lose game 4 at home, right?
Right.
Because then it kind of negates the home court advantage. So I think the Lakers end up bouncing back just because in general, I mean, I think that there were adjustments that they made to get back in the game. And, the fact that LeBron was as bad as he was, and it was still a 1 point, winnable game in the third quarter, just makes me feel like that overall the starters are better than the Grizzly starters. It just kind of comes down to the bench, and if they can do some better stuff with the bench lineups. This in this game they went a little too small for my liking. They brought in Wenyen Gabriel, and he was much better. So I think that's probably something they're gonna go with,
Hmm.
as opposed to having LeBron and Rui as the 4 and the 5. It just hasn't worked. And it just gets kind of annoying, when you watch like, the same thing over and over again that doesn't work. Memphis made adjustments as well. So it's kind of just come down to, just who can adjust the most, right? And it's also a defense first series. These are two of your best, these are two of the better defensive teams in the league. Both teams play great defense, right? We haven't seen any super high scoring, nights from any of these teams, right? You look
Right.
at some of these other series, right, where every night, like, it's like 120 or more. And I think there's only been, a 120 plus scoring game once. And I think that was
Exactly.
game one where the Lakers had 128. Other
Yes.
than that, it's been, pretty low scoring,
Yeah.
for the most part. But again, that's just kind of evident how, both teams are really good defensive teams led by some really good defensive players.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Jaren Jackson Jr., AD, right? Those are kind of the headliners defensively. So that's to me what it's going to come down to for the most part is just the defense, just because that's, what both of these teams hang their hats on.
Yeah. Huge defensive game. And, you've got some premier defenders. If you think about it, like Jackson Jr., Anthony Davis, when he wants to, he can be a really good defender. Dylan Brooks, sometimes, I guess. I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
put him in that category. Sure.
I think he's
Um,
a good defender.
yeah. So I mean, you've got some pretty good defensive guys. So I feel like that's probably what's gonna, what this series is gonna come down to. So I'm looking forward to it. I think it's gonna be a huge battle, and I'm really curious to see if Memphis can actually win this next game. But we'll talk about that in a second.
And then moving on to uh, game 5
Yeah.
of the Miami Milwaukee series. To me, kind of the most shocking result of the night.
Yeah.
Miami wins 128-126 in overtime, eliminating the Milwaukee Bucks. This is the sixth time in NBA history that a number one seed was knocked out in the first round. I'll get into the other ones, in a little bit. But first off, we'll start off, just by talking about the game.
Yeah.
Jimmy Butler once again played like a superstar. 42 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists.
On a
The
tear,
three
man.
point shot, yeah, the 3 point shot wasn't quite as effective. 3 out of 10 made, still made some big shots down the
Mm-hmm.
stretch, obviously, but um, the other key was he got some help in this game. Bam Adebayo had, a breakout game, a 20-point triple double, 20, 10, and 10
Mm-hmm.
with 2 steals and a block. Gabe Vincent, 22 points. Not the most efficient, but always hit some big timely shots. Kevin Love as a starter, 15 points, 12 rebounds, kind of a throwback game, 5 of 11 from three. Kyle Lowry with 10 points, 2 assists off the bench. Just, a pretty solid performance from a number of guys. We're gonna start out with the winning team. But just to go over the Buck stats, right? Giannis 38 and 20. Sounds like a monster game, but he also had 7 turnovers and
Yeah.
missed 13 free throws. So not, even though really good numbers in some areas, in other areas, not so much. Middleton had a strong bounce back game, 33 points, 6 assists, 6 rebounds, 10 of 24, which isn't great, but still, this was, a much better game than he had been the last couple of games. Lopez, 18 and 10, 7 of 11, 3 of 5 from three. Holiday really struggled offensively, and that was kind of something to look at. And then after that, not really much else from anyone else, right? Grayson Allen, 8 points on 7 shots. Wes Matthews, with 6 points. Pat Connaughton, with 7 points, 3 of 3. But overall, like I said, this was the most shocking one for me. It was kind of annoying because, this game was on at the same time as the Warriors Kings. He kind of either had to flip
Right.
back and forth. or find a way to watch, both of them on, um, separate devices. But just in general, this was another, just to me, just mind-bogglingly bad performance from Milwaukee late in the game. Similar to Game 4, they were up by double digits going into the fourth quarter. Miami just, chipped away, chipped away, chipped away, whittled it down, right? And then Jimmy Butler gets, a great play call by Eric Spoelstra where Gabe Vincent inbounds the ball to him for an alley-oop with zero point 0.5 seconds left. And then Mike Budenholzer just does something that just doesn't make any sense. He
Yeah.
doesn't call a timeout, doesn't run a play to try to, get a game-winning shot. I understand that with zero point 0.5 seconds, it's not a lot of time, but I mean, you got to try. It's a do or die game where,
Yeah.
if you could go into overtime and lose, which is what happened. And then, just in general, not calling timeouts as Miami was getting on a run, just kind of letting Miami just kind of like, flow back into the game.
Right.
And then in overtime, similar situation where they have a chance to win the game. They don't call a timeout. I understand not necessarily calling an initial timeout just so that way you don't have to score against the set defense because Milwaukee's half court offense wasn't great. But once it got to a point where like Grayson Allen was just dribbling the ball and didn't really know where to go, that's when you need to call a timeout.
And I think he had the final
So to
shot,
me,
right?
yeah, exactly. They didn't even get off a shot.
No.
I mean, just to me, just a mind-bogglingly just awful collapse
Yeah.
from the Milwaukee Bucks down the stretch. And I mean, this one is gonna sting. I mean, this was my pick to come out of the East and win the
Me too.
title. And to have them not only lose in the first round, but to lose in five, to me is just that one just stings. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand that Giannis was hobbled. I understand that Middleton, hadn't been right. He had been kind of a shell of himself for most of the season. But just in general, I still felt like the Bucks should have won this series. And the way that these last couple of games went, just to me, just is not a good look. And I do kind of wonder what happens with Coach Bud. But I'll kind of let you, go into your thoughts before I,
Yeah.
before I
I
talk.
mean, I think you hit on all the points, so I'm not gonna stay on it too long. But for me, I think the keys to this loss, to be honest, are the free throws. I mean, you have 45 free throw attempts and you only made 28 of them, compared to Miami's 17 and, they made 11. I think that stings too. That's so many gimmies that you should be making.
And it by two.
Exactly. And you probably could have prevented overtime or whatever, but, I don't know. This hurts because, on a surface level, I think, just looking at the box score, you would think Miami probably, may have lost this game just due to the fact that, if you look at like, Middleton and Giannis, you would think with Middleton and Giannis going off that they would win, but that just wasn't the case. And that's unfortunate, but, you got to give credit where it's due. And Jimmy Butler is just a monster. And credit to Bam, too. I mean, he had a triple double.
And Eric Spoelstra.
Yeah, Eric Spoelstra. And, that's the thing. I think the Bucks not only lost this game due to free throws, but like you said, it was a coaching battle and Bud lost. And I'm not sure, like you said, his future there is probably up in the air, especially due to the fact that, he was a huge part in their errors. Like you said, with the timeouts, just the lack of play calling. It just looks like sometimes Bud doesn't know what he's doing when his superstars don't have the ball in his hands. I don't know, or in their hands. I don't know. It's just weird to me, but I'm not gonna, I've seen some people saying that this season is a failure for the Bucks. I'm not gonna go too hard on them like that. I'm not gonna say it's a failure, but it's still disappointing. I think, as the number one seed, you never want to go out like this. And Miami, they are my dark horse, but like, still, I really would have preferred to have seen Milwaukee win this series, but it is what it is, and I think this shakes up a lot, especially mainly in the East, because I feel like it's a little bit more up in the air now. But we'll see what happens. But
Yeah.
this one hurts.
Yeah, just to get back into it. Yeah, I mean, the two-man game between Giannis and Lopez, Miami just had no answer for because they don't
Right.
have a lot of size, they don't have a lot of rim protection,
Right.
and it was working. That was why Milwaukee, had a lead in the fourth quarters of these last couple of games, and then for whatever reason they went away from it. I don't understand why you would go away from something that worked, and instead they were going one-on-one and just engaging in just bad, inefficient half-court offense. It's bad, but on the failure thing, I don't know. I'm honestly gonna have to say, like I said, I get that the injuries happen, and all that, but I think that this season was a failure, just from the
Okay.
perspective of they were the odds-on favorite to win the title. most people pick them to win the title just in general, even if they weren't, betting on it. You have the best player in the league. I think most of us feel like Giannis is the best player. You're the
Yeah.
number one seed. You have home court advantage. You're going against, the eighth seed, and it's not like this Miami Heat team is really that talented. Um, so I don't know. I just look at it as a failure. I mean, it'd be one thing if you lost to like Boston or Philly and you played really well, to the best of your ability, but you just got outplayed, by Philly or Boston. But to lose in the first round and then lose in 5 games, I don't know. I think that's kind of a failure. I mean,
Okay.
I
I,
think this one is really gonna sting.
I have a
Just in
question. Um,
Yeah,
and I'm going to pose the question that Giannis posed to the reporter who said it was a failure. You know,
yeah.
out of all the seasons that Jordan played, or you could take any of the greats, but
Mhm.
let's just take Jordan, just because
Sure.
he has 6 rings, right? So
Mhm.
by that logic, do you think every season where Jordan didn't win a ring was a failure, technically, or not?
Um, I guess I just look at it from the perspective of I look at failure a little bit differently depending on, where you are, right?
Okay,
Because like,
first seed, I
for
get it.
some of those seasons, yeah, because like, for some of those seasons, right, Jordan wasn't on like a championship team that had
For sure.
championship expectations. Because there was stretches where he was a young player. And then obviously when he was in Washington, right, they weren't a championship team.
Right.
Um, but I'm sure, like, just in general, right? Like, if he had had a season during his prime where they lost, right? Like, I'm sure when he came back and they lost to Orlando, right? I'm sure he would have looked at that as a failure.
Right.
And I think it just depends on the team, right? Like, if Sacramento loses to Golden State, obviously, I'm sure they're disappointed.
Yeah.
I'm sure they would want to win, but I don't think they would look at the season as a failure because it's not championship or bust, for them, right? But say for a team like Milwaukee, right, who again is the number one seed, they have the best record with the best player. I just think that is a failure. Obviously, again, it can depend because, like I said, if they had gone to the conference finals, and lost to like Philly or Boston, and like I said, a hard fought 7 game series, and they just got outplayed.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be disappointing, but I wouldn't necessarily look at it as like an abject failure. But to
Okay.
me, losing in 5 to the eighth seed, I mean, that's only happened 5 other times in NBA history. I mean, so I don't know how that wouldn't be considered a failure. But again, I think they'll bounce back. I mean, because in fairness, right, they lost to the Heat in the bubble, in 5 in a series that again went, I think, pretty unexpectedly, in Miami's favor, right? We didn't expect Miami to win. And then the following year, right, then Milwaukee comes back and then crushes them, right, en route to a title run. So I think that they'll learn from it. Obviously, the Bucks, I think, will still be in the mix for a title
Oh yeah.
next year. Right? Giannis is still going to be in the mix, but that one stings. But just in general, right? If we look back at these 1-8 matchups, the previous 5 teams, I mean, so we'll go back 1994, right?
Mhm.
The Denver Nuggets, right? They upset the Seattle Sonics, right? So like
Okay.
Dikembe Mutombo's Nuggets, they
Right.
upset the Sonics.
Okay.
Then you go to 1999, right? The Knicks, I think they're the 8th seed. They upset and beat the Miami Heat, and they actually go on to the finals. They don't win,
Okay.
right? But just kind of interesting, right? Because I think that's the only one that went past the first round. And then fast forward a little bit, right? You got that 2008 We Believe Warriors team, right? They beat the Mavericks. Then in 2011, which is the one I think most people tend to forget, is the Spurs lost in the first round to the Memphis Grizzlies in 2011.
Oh yeah.
And then we have the one in 2012, I think, where it was the Bulls. They lost to the Sixers, right? And that was when Rose tore his ACL,
Right.
right? So I think of, all 6 of those, I think this one's the worst one. It's got to be. I mean, the first 2, right? It was a best of 5, so the league was a little bit different, right? It's a lot, tougher to win a 5 game series, than a 7 game series. I feel like, upsets are more likely and more possible there
Mhm.
just because it's fewer wins. Um, but I think this one's got to be the toughest one because everybody thought that this team was gonna, win the title. And like I said, I get Giannis is hobbled. I get Middleton had been a shell of himself for most of the season. I still did not expect them to lose to the Heat because, and again, the last 2 games, the way they collapsed, I just don't. I just feel like that's to me is a failure. Just my opinion, but it doesn't make me really think any differently of Giannis because
Right.
again, I know he played with an injury. He played hard. It just didn't work out. I
Yeah.
mean, it sucks. But hopefully they can, kind of grow from this. I'm just curious what happens with Bud because I
Me
mean, I
too.
just think in general, right? Like, I don't know how you can make a mistake like that as an experienced head coach, right? Like, if
For
it was
sure.
like Darvin Ham or some other rookie head coach, like it
Missoula.
would still be bad. Yeah, Missoula, yeah, Missoula or somebody like that, it would still be bad, but at least you could have the excuse of it's a rookie head coach, right?
Right.
But, like, this guy's been a head coach for a while. I mean, he has, he's coached at this point for so long that he's got a coaching tree, right? Like, Darvin Ham is part of that coaching tree,
Yes.
um, as well as others, right? So, I mean, like, just in general, I mean, I don't get that one, like, because, and again, I'm not gonna pretend like I know more than an NBA head coach. It's just like some of the mistakes that he was making just, to me, just baffled me. Because again, this guy won a title,
Right.
um, and it's just kind of interesting, just because before the Bucks won a title, there were a lot of questions about whether or not Coach Bud would even stay in Milwaukee. Because I think the year they won the title, the rumor was if they didn't make it to the conference
I
finals
remember
or
that.
whatever, then he'd get fired, right? And
Yeah.
they, in my opinion, got kind of fortunate, right, with the Nets, where you had the injuries to Kyrie and Harden, right? Durant's shoe was like, just in
Yeah.
what, or his toe or
Yeah.
whatever
It's
was
tough.
like just inside
Yeah.
the line,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it all changes, right? So I mean, it just kind of felt shades of the Bucks before they won a title, where it felt like they were a really good regular season team, but would come up short in the playoffs.
Right.
But it just sucks because they've already won a title, so to see those type of mistakes being made to me just feels like it's inexcusable. But again, I'm
I
gonna
get it.
give Giannis a little bit of slack. I mean, obviously, when you're the best player, you got to take some blame. But I think I'm gonna give him a little bit of slack because I know he played through injuries, and he missed a couple games. So I'll give him that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I think it's a failure, but it's not all on him. There's a lot of other things going on as well, and I just kind of wonder what Milwaukee does in the offseason. Because even with like the wings, right, Jimmy Butler going off, I mean, they didn't have anybody who could guard
No.
him. And then it was strange where, you would think, like that they may decide to put Giannis on him. But they didn't. They just kept going with Drew Holiday. And Drew Holiday is a great defender, but he's a guard. He's not
Yeah.
a forward. He's not
You
a
can't
wing.
go
He
one
shouldn't be
on one with
guarding.
Jimmy Butler and Drew
Yeah,
Holiday. It
he
just
shouldn't
doesn't
be
make
guarding
sense.
big wings. Yeah, exactly. He shouldn't be guarding big wings like Jimmy Butler. Jay Crowder, right? That was the guy that they traded, what was it, like 5 second-round picks for?
Yeah.
Doesn't play at all. I mean, it just, what was the point of that trade? I mean, he might as
Right.
well have just stayed in Phoenix. I mean,
Yeah.
Phoenix is still in the playoffs. I mean, and he'd actually play, probably a relatively important role if he was there.
Yeah. He
So
played big
to me,
minutes,
it
I
just,
think.
yeah, exactly. He might even start. I mean,
He
it
might be
doesn't
in a
make any
position
sense.
like Craig, Torrey Craig.
Exactly. Like it just, nothing that I saw in those last couple of games made any semblance of sense.
I get it.
So I think, yeah. So in terms of the blame pie, obviously the players are on there, just because you can't ever have leave the players off the hook. But I think Coach Bud, I think he's the guy that has got to take this one on the chin the most, because I think his coaching decisions ultimately cost them the last couple of games and cost them the series, because they were in a position to win. Because like I said, they had double-digit leads in the fourth quarter in both of these games. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't allow that to happen in the playoffs, right? It's
Yeah. And
one
they
thing
just
if
get
it's a regular
erased.
season game, but not in the playoffs. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just, to me, that's just unacceptable.
Yeah. I have to agree with you. I think it is really the biggest, first round loss. I think, this is bad. Because, like you said, everyone had them winning the title. But like I said, I personally I can't, draw it down to a failure just because Giannis was hurt. That's the only reason. I think if it was a
I think that's
full
fair.
and healthy Giannis, then we can call this season a failure. But with him being hurt and him hobbling around, I can't call it a failure, but I can
Yeah,
definitely call it a disappointment. And
yeah,
frustrating.
fair.
That's what those are the adjectives I can use for it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
that's
definitely the
fair. Because
biggest first round loss.
yeah, that's fair. Because I think I could see the Bucks being in a situation where they're like, you know what, we had injuries. It sucks we lost, but we can still run it back.
Right.
And just try again next year, and hopefully we have better luck in terms of injuries. I think that's fair.
Because they were so good in
Um,
the regular season. So I don't know.
yeah,
I really don't know. The only answer I have is really
yeah,
the coaching and injuries.
yeah. But it's kind of interesting when we go into the regular season. Um, it almost kind of needs to be a discussion about whether or not the regular season, really means a whole lot. I know there had been a lot of talk about that. I think that there is a level of importance to the regular season in terms of building continuity, just being familiar with everything and, just building good habits. But then you look at these playoffs so far. I mean, we're in position to potentially have four upsets in the first round. I mean, you already have the Knicks who upset the Cavs. You have the Heat, the eighth seeded Heat upsetting the Bucks.
Yeah.
Bless you. Then you
Thanks.
have, uh, the Warriors who could potentially upset the Kings. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the Lakers who could potentially upset the Grizzlies. I mean, that's a lot of first round upsets. just in general. And a couple of those teams, were kind of, up and down over the course of the regular season. So
Right.
I just kind of wonder, like, is this the kind of stuff that we're going to see going forward? Are we going to see more upsets? Because, historically, that didn't really happen a whole lot in the NBA. Even a 2-7 matchup, I think they said it's only happened 5 times where the lower seed, upset the higher seed. So
Yeah.
I just kind of wonder if this is just kind of the norm. Because, I mean, this is just, just a shock to me because I'm not used to seeing this many upsets. There's always usually like one,
One or two.
maybe two that happen. And sometimes you can kind of see them coming, right? Like
Yeah.
just because like, this team looks like they're probably not, ready for the playoffs. But like, I mean, this is a lot. I mean, that's half the first round matchups.
Right.
Yeah. So, just kind of moving on into the Warriors Kings. 123 to 116, right? So the Warriors go up 3-2. This is the win that they needed to get, right? In order to win the series, they needed to win at least one in Sacramento. They got it, led by Stephen Curry with 31 and 8. 5 turnovers, 2 of 10 from three, but, made key baskets when needed. Klay Thompson had a huge first half, right?
Yeah.
Finished with 25 points, 5 fouls, but 5 of 11 from three, hit a lot of big shots to keep him in the game. Poole had his moments, kind of struggled overall, though. 10
Hmm.
points, 6 assists, 2 steals, 4 of 12 in the starting lineup. Wiggins, 20 points, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks. He's looking better and better. Looney with 22 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 points. Um, but to me, the big story was Draymond Green once again coming off the bench. I
Hmm.
wasn't sure that they'd bring him off the bench again, but they did. And he had a great performance 21 points, 7 assists, 4 rebounds, 4 steals, a block, 8 of 10 from the field, even knocked down a 3, 4 of 8 from the line, which isn't great. But overall, masterful performance on both ends of the floor.
Yes.
They definitely don't win this game without him, right? Just in terms of what he can do on both ends of the floor. Moving on to the Kings, right? Sabonis with 21 and 10. 9 of 15, but just overall just hasn't felt as impactful this series as he had been in the regular season. I think Golden State overall has done a good job of, kind of limiting his effectiveness, kind of forcing him to be one-on-one and not really allowing him to spread the ball around.
Yeah.
He's a really good passer. So kind of forcing him to be a scorer. Keegan Murray started the game off hot, right? 4 of 5, 2 of 2 from three, ten point
Hmm.
six rebounds. Didn't really do anything else after
No.
that. Aaron Fox also started off hot. Right, right, nailed his first 3 or 4 jumpers. Right, I think he had like what 18 or something at halftime,
Hmm.
but ended up finishing with 24 points, 9 of 25 from the field, 9 assists, 7 rebounds. You could tell, like,
The
he
finger.
was trying to play through his hand
Yeah.
or finger injury. Kind of looked like some guys were smacking at it, but again, it's a
Yeah.
physical sport, it's a contact sport. Unfortunately, when you're playing through injuries, that's something you're probably gonna have to deal with just in general.
Hmm.
Um, right? Kevin Herter, once again, pretty much a no-show. 4 of 10, 9 points. He's kind of been, you know, to me, one of the reasons why the Kings haven't been able to get over the hump, right? Because you're talking about 2 games where they lost, really close games, right? They lost the last game by a point, and this one they lost by 7. He just makes like a couple more shots, right? I mean, those could have easily turned into wins. Malik Monk
Yeah.
got a much better performance out of him, 21 and 5, along with 3 assists, 2 steals. But just in general, I think at this point it feels like the Warriors have probably closed out this series. All they needed to do was win one in Sacramento. They haven't lost any of their home games. They're one of the best teams at home. So that's pretty much to me like that was the key for them to win this series. They needed to win at least one in Sacramento, and then not lose any of their home games. Obviously, they still could potentially lose. Right? They barely escaped the last game in the Chase Center.
Yeah.
But just in general, right? Going back home with a raucous crowd, with a chance to close them out and move on to the next round. I think that they'll probably take care of business in this next game. What did you think of this game?
Yeah, I could only watch the first half of this game. I was so, just drained of energy. But yeah, it was really entertaining. And like I was telling a lot of like the people that I talk, hoops about or hoops with, I don't think the Warriors or the Kings are probably going to beat each other, by shooting the three ball because it's been so horrendous. It's got to be the paint mash attack. And it just seems like the
Mhm.
Warriors have that advantage because I feel like Looney is generally a better defender than Sabonis. Draymond is definitely a
Yeah,
better defender than Sabonis. I think that can go without being said. So it's like, technically you should really see the Warriors, just paint mash, but, they're going to shoot their threes because that's their identity. Um, but yeah, I mean, I predicted that the Warriors were probably going to win this one, just because they were coming off of 2 wins, and with their back against the wall, you cannot like you just can't count them out because that's how good they are. They're a championship team. They've been through this before, not this exact situation, but they've been through the playoffs before, and a lot of these guys on the Kings have never even seen playoff minutes before. So, that's something also to account for. And then also coaching, I guess you can say that Kerr is technically winning the coaching battle between him and Mike Brown, but you know,
Mike
uh,
Brown's done a good job.
yeah, me too.
Um, yeah,
But
but Steve
there's
Kerr's
just some,
definitely
yeah, there's just sometimes like where Steve Kerr, he just rubs me off as like a little nonchalant, where it's like he doesn't really care what's going on, especially with the turnover battle. Like he seems to never care about turnovers because he just thinks threes are going to get them back into the game. Um,
I mean, that's their team, though. I mean,
I
they're a very
know,
high turnover team.
I know.
So
So like, and I mean, yeah, they did win the turnover battle in this game, but in general, series wise, I think if the Warriors take control of the ball better or take care of it better, and paint mash, I think they can easily finish this one off in the next game. But I'm just happy our pick is looking solid, and the Kings. It looks like they've had a good run, but I don't think they'll be lighting the beam the next game. So
yeah,
I don't know.
I just think in general, with these young teams, and I just think that with the way that the Kings are constructed, they don't really have like a real, rim protector at that 5 spot, and I think that's what's hurting them. Because I mean, if Sabonis was like, a legitimate rim protector. I mean, and obviously, like, you're not always going to find centers who are like, really good on both ends of the floor.
Hmm.
But you look at, but like, even a Kevon Looney, right? Not like a great offensive player, but he's, a very good defensive player. Again, not super athletic, right? But very strong, right? Very intelligent, just knows where to be positionally. I mean, like I said, pretty much they're forcing Sabonis to be a one-on-one player. They're standing back in the paint, not really letting him get anything really going on the outside. Obviously, he's not really a jump shooter, right? But so pretty much he's kind of forced to just kind of try to attack them in the post, and they'll take that battle, right? Because again, Looney's very strong, and he's gonna make it hard. He's gonna make him work, right? And again, that's kind of the goal. If you can limit him in terms of not being able to let him, facilitate and create for
Yeah.
others, that's kind of how you win, right? I mean, because obviously, at times there's going to be games where he gets his offensively. Again, he had 21 points, 9 of 15 from the field. But just in general, I'm a little surprised that the Kings haven't really tried to use him in the pick and roll, just
Right.
to get him moving, just to kind of get him, just rolling to the basket and being more of a threat, just on the move. But, at the same time, he's not super athletic. Um, right. And just in general, right? Like, I mean, other than De'Aaron Fox, and Malik Monk, I mean, like, I guess you can run pick and rolls with them, right? But, Fox, it kind of feels like he likes to kind of, take guys one on one and use his speed a little bit more so. So,
That's just
I
his
don't
play
know. Like,
style.
yeah, like I said, I think Mike Brown has done a good job, but I also just think he's just kind of limited with the roster he had. I mean, again, going into the playoffs, I didn't really expect the Kings to get out of this series, but but I still wouldn't look at them as a disappointment because again,
No, not
like
at all.
it's a young team. This is the first time they've been to the playoffs in almost 20 years. You have a number of guys, like you said, who have never been to the playoffs before, right? Fox, Murray, Monk, right? Davion Mitchell, right? So, it's kind of their opportunity, to kind of show out. And hopefully they don't go anywhere. Hopefully they, come back next season, and continue to get better and continue to make improvements, and still stick around and maybe win a playoff series.
Yeah.
Just because again, it's a fun team to watch, right? They're a high powered offense, they play really fast. They just got to get better defensively. And, I'm just, again, with Sabonis in the middle, I'm not sure necessarily if you can do that. Right, because it's just kind of weird, right? Because they'll bring in Alex Len, and in a couple of those games, he kind of changed the game a little bit. But just in general, right? Like not having a real, true rim protecting five, to
Yeah.
put out there, it just hurts. I mean, like that's to me the thing that they're missing because the Warriors are just attacking the basket, and like it's kind of interesting just because again, they're known as a three-point heavy shooting team. In general, right in the past, they would still get a lot of drives to the basket because they would kind of, they would understand that defensively people would overplay their
Right.
shooting.
Yeah.
And it would allow them to, just kind of get easy looks at the rim. Because I think that was how they beat Dallas in the playoffs last year. Where because they didn't shoot well from three in that Dallas series, but every time they would move the ball around and eventually somebody would find a way to the basket. And I think, that was kind of the key to the turnaround this series. Just attacking the basket and not trying to just turn it into a 3-point shootout. And
Yeah.
then with the Kings, right, like the 3-point shooting hasn't been there for them, right? Because that was their bread and butter for most of the season. But they've probably I think they've only had one game where they shot, like 40% from three as a team, and I think that was the game they lost game 4, right, by a point. So
Mm-hmm.
just in general, right, when you're so heavily reliant on the three and they're not falling, it's really hard to win games, unless you can defend, right? That's why like, there are other teams like say like a Memphis or a Lakers, right? Like neither of those teams are great 3-point shooting teams, but they defend really, really well. So they can win games without having to shoot well from three. Obviously, you don't want them shooting 20% from three. You're not going to win a playoff series shooting that badly from three. But you can win a couple of games with poor 3-point shooting team, with a poor 3-point shooting if you can defend,
Yes.
and if you can get shots around the basket. And I just think with the Warriors, I think you're just seeing their offense is a little too versatile for Sacramento to be able to stop.
Yeah.
Um, so it was just kind of interesting, just to see how that matchup would go. It's been a
Yeah.
fun series, but I think this one probably wraps up, over the weekend when they play in Game 6.
Yeah. I agree 100%.
Yeah. And then to wrap up our last recap, we have the Boston Celtics and the Atlanta Hawks. So the Boston Celtics win 128-120, eliminating the Atlanta Hawks in Game 6. Right, moving on to the second round to play the Philadelphia 76ers.
Right.
So we pretty much almost have all the second round matchups set. We're just waiting for a couple more, right? Warriors, Kings, Lakers, Grizzlies. But
Mm-hmm.
Jason Tatum, 30 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists, 11 of 24 of 10 from 3. Jaylen Brown, 32 and 5, along with 2 assists, 1 block, right? So pretty much those two guys leading the way for the most part. Marcus Smart with a big offensive game, 22 points. Al Horford with 10 and 12, 2 steals, 3 blocks. Struggled from 3, but did the little things. Derek White, not really much of a great performance offensively. Grant Williams, just 3 points. Malcolm Brogdon off the bench, 17 and 4, right? Big performance. Didn't shoot well from 3, right? But still got to the rim. And then going to the Atlanta Hawks, Trae Young with 30 and 10, 9 for 28, right? So not an efficient night. DeJounte Murray with 14 points, 11 assists, 7 rebounds in his return from his suspension, right? It's okay numbers, right? 10 and 10 for Capella, 20 points from DeAndre Hunter, right? 20 and 6, 16 from John Collins. Just not enough, right?
Yeah.
High scoring game. Hawks just couldn't get stops. Boston shot the ball really well. And this was kind of what I predicted would happen. I figured, Boston would take care of business in Game 6. It was
Yeah.
back and
Me too.
forth. It was pretty close for most of the game. But Boston ended up pulling away, right? Obviously you'd like to get, kind of a more comfortable win. But again, Atlanta, has some talent on there, like we'd been saying. So, and again, in an elimination game, usually teams are not just going to go quietly. They're going to play hard. They're going to
Right.
try. Um, but, again, from Boston, this is the game you needed to win. So you're moving on to the second round. We'll get into the Hawks in a little bit, but first, let's start with Celtics. What'd you think?
Um, I think, after watching this series, they're probably the only team in the East that I can, confidently choose as my pick to go to the finals now that Milwaukee's out of there. So, just a solid team, but, they did give me a scare by giving away, a couple games to Atlanta. But to be fair, I think they had the leeway to do so. I think, they were going to come out of the series regardless. But, now you've let Philly rest completely. So they're healing up. I'm not sure what the update is on Joel Embiid, but I don't know. What did they say? He's like 50-50 or something like last week.
Yeah, but I have a feeling he'll play. It sounds
Yeah.
like he's going to play a race.
Yeah. So, I think this Boston team can get Philly out of the way just due to the amount of depth that they have on this squad. So I think I like, Boston over Philly in that sense. But, shout out to the Hawks. They did get 2. That's more than I thought that they even had in them. So, but back to the Celtics. Yeah, like I said, I think they're the only team in the East that can potentially come out of there and go to the finals. And honestly, like I said, my pick for the West to go to the finals is the Suns, and I think they can honestly beat the Suns, just due to the depth. But it all is dependent on is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown going to be able to, have an offensive onslaught? Because I feel like Tatum's a little bit more prone to kind of disappear than Jaylen Brown, but that could just be me. But I think a lot of their whole playoff run is probably going to depend on Jason Tatum a lot and how consistent he is. So, who's your pick to come out of the East now that Milwaukee's done? So,
Yeah,
do you think
I
it's
feel like
Boston?
Yeah, I feel like I'm gonna have to lean to Boston.
Okay.
I don't know. With this first round series, it feels like Boston is more vulnerable now.
Right.
I mean, again, I don't ever expect sweeps at this point. In the playoffs, just because in general, I think it's very hard to sweep a team, and I think with the 3-point shooting, you could just have a random game where somebody just shoots really well from three, and it's just kind of an outlier performance.
Right.
But I don't know. Just a couple of these games were kind of close, right? Boston's defense didn't really feel like it was as good as it had been last year. So I'm a little, interested to see, how it looks against Philadelphia. To
Right.
me, with Philly, it all just comes down to health because I think the issue with them is Harden still looks like he's not healthy, and I think he needs to be really good in order for Philly to advance. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think you can just have Joel Embiid and maybe like a Tyrese Maxey. I don't think just those two guys can play well and they beat
Right.
Boston. I think you need James Harden to play well, and if he's not healthy, I don't really see how he does it. Against Brooklyn, he kind of struggled. Um, I mean, he couldn't really get to the rim, couldn't really finish around the basket, and that's been a big part of his game for most of his career. And if he's kind of just strictly relegated to being like a jump shooter off the dribble, I don't know if that's going to translate that well. So if he's healthy, I'll give Philly more of a shot than I would have given them before, just
Okay.
because it just feels like Boston. I don't know, didn't really look as great in this first round performance. But in fairness, at the same time, each matchup is different, right? Atlanta's a very different team um, than Philadelphia, right? So maybe they go against Philly and they end up winning in five. So I still think Boston's probably my pick at this point to come out of the East, but I don't know. The East is feeling a little more wide open than I thought, just especially now that Milwaukee's gone.
Yeah. I get that 100%.
Yeah.
And I
And then,
understand your hesitancy. Like you said, it's
mhm,
wide open now. And I think, before the Bucks put on that performance, I think, they were kind of crowned the champions before, or, champions of the East before, they had even gotten out of the first round. But now that's over, it's all up in the air. So I'm curious to see who's really going to come out of here.
yeah. And then just moving on to the Hawks, I'm just kind of curious what they do in the offseason. Trae Young, struggled through the early part of this first round series,
Yeah.
but I thought he played better as the series went on. DeJounte Murray was okay. Right. And then you had a couple other guys like Collins and Hunter who struggled early, but they got better down the stretch. I just don't know what this team does, because there were rumors about Trae Young. I just don't feel like he's probably going to go anywhere. I mean,
Okay.
there was a rumor from Mark Stein, that suggested that teams are not very high on him because they feel like he's a defensive liability.
Which is
I don't
true.
know. It almost kind of feels like code word for we don't really want to trade for him and his contract.
Right.
'Cause there's other guys that are not great defenders. I know he's, analytically ranked as like one of the worst defensive players in the NBA,
Mm-hmm.
which I get, right? Small, not athletic, right? Doesn't really try defensively, but just in general, I do wonder what Atlanta does because it does feel like even though DeJounte Murray is a good player, and I don't think he's been bad for Atlanta at all, the fit is a little clunky, just because neither of them really play off the ball like that. Maybe Quinn Snyder can work something out. And again, they gave up, multiple first round picks and, they made the playoffs, obviously, right? But, again, like, you're not going to have your pick, right?
Right.
You could have added another, like mid first round pick to this team, right? Which I think I would take if I'm Atlanta, right? Rather than just a first round playoff exit as a 7 seed. Um, but I don't know. Like, just in general, I mean, I just think that this team has a lot of questions. They made a few mistakes, I think. They traded away Kevin Herter, right? And obviously he struggled in the playoffs for Sacramento, but overall I think he had been a positive for the Kings for most of the season. Right. They gave Bogdanovich an extension and he's been fine for them, right? But he is older.
Right.
So I do wonder, what he looks like as he ages a little bit. Obviously he's a good shooter. But just in general, I don't know, right? And you got other guys like a Kung Wu who's been good, right? Sadiq Bey, right? Jalen Johnson, right? You got guys that you drafted that you may have to pay for if you want to keep. Obviously DeAndre Hunter's on a big contract. I'm not a huge DeAndre Hunter fan. I
Nah,
think
me
he's
neither.
okay, but
He's all right.
I think he's okay. But just in general, right? Like I think he's making like what 90 million over 4 or 5 years. That just feels like a lot.
Yeah.
For a guy that you can't always rely on. So I don't know. I think this team has a lot of questions, and I just kind of wonder where they go in the offseason because I feel like you could go in a million directions, right? They could trade Trae Young. They could move a bunch of other guys on the roster. I just don't know.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because I think New York has really messed up my opinion on a lot of teams. Like, with New York being how good they are, that changes my whole entire opinion on Cleveland and Atlanta. And in the regular season, you kind of expected Atlanta to be in Cleveland situation. I feel like, well, maybe not as high, but maybe more around the Knicks area. I guess. I think this is just too low for a team with the guys that they have on this roster. So I don't know. It just didn't mesh well. And if you think about it, like it's the same thing. Like I know Donovan Mitchell's not well. Let me put it this way. Shoot. Holy crap. DeJounte Murray is not on, Donovan Mitchell's level, I don't think. But, in terms of like returns, you kind of want to see the return value be what Donovan Mitchell was for the Cleveland Cavaliers in the regular season. In the postseason, it was pretty abysmal. I think everyone can agree on that. But in the regular season, it wasn't that bad. So it's like, you kind of have to just put that into perspective and just like New York eliminating Cleveland. Like that also makes me wonder, if New York was playing Atlanta, would the same thing have happened? Would New York be moving on? And I think they probably would. So I feel like, because playing against the Boston Celtics is a tall ask. I get that. But at the same time, you have to take into account the regular season. And I think they expected a little bit more in the regular season. So I think something's gonna have to shake and give in Atlanta. If going forward, I don't think that it's gonna be the same roster. Somebody's got to go, and I don't know who it's gonna be.
Yeah, I mean they finished the season as a 500 team. They were in the play-in, right? Beat the Heat in the play-in. And again, like you said, they lasted in the series longer than I think we expected.
Yeah.
I thought it could be like 5, maybe 6, but
Mm-hmm.
probably more likely 5.
Right.
It went 6 games. They played hard, but just in general, like I said, I just think, and again, it's not a knock on DeJounte Murray, but it just
No,
feels
not at
like
all.
you said, the return you would like a little bit more, return on your investment, right? Because I mean, again, they gave up multiple first round picks unprotected, right? And again, Murray's a really good player, but again, you went out in the first round, right? And you made a move that, in my opinion, right, you should at least get to the second round,
Yes.
maybe conference finals. I mean, they went to the conference finals before. It just feels more and more like that run was kind of fluky.
Yes.
And it just felt like that in general, the organization may have overreacted to
They
that
jumped the gun.
situation. Yeah, and jumped the gun and went all in on a move that they probably shouldn't have made. Kind of like Minnesota, but nowhere near as damaging in my opinion.
Yeah.
But just in general, right? I do kind of wonder if we see like some of these trade markets reset. Because I just think in general, it feels like with free agency, there's not as many like star players that enter free agency,
No.
right? And more and more stars, asking out of their situations and asking to be traded. I think teams are going to try to find ways to be a little bit smarter with their assets. Um, and only give up, a high amount of picks for like the real stars, right?
Yes.
Like, like say Phoenix, right? Obviously they traded away a lot to get Kevin Durant, right? But it's Kevin Durant, right? Obviously you don't feel great about that trade if it's Rudy Gobert, right? But, for Kevin Durant, if you get a title out of it, right, then you already won.
It all
So,
comes down to that value, man. And it's like it's
yeah,
all skewed. It's really messed up. And I think Gobert definitely has a factor in
yeah,
screwing that up.
yeah, because we talked about it at the trade deadline. It did feel like, the ridiculous asking prices did come down, right? Because when we watched the trade deadline, we saw mostly second round picks get moved. We didn't really see
Right.
like teams moving multiple first round picks for players.
Yeah.
Like for example, like I remember with the Lakers trade, right? Guys like Jared Vanderbilt and Malik Beasley, it was rumored that both guys, would require a first round pick for each one individually, right? But instead, all of those guys ended up coming in for just one, right?
Right.
And it just again, yeah, exactly. Like 3 first round picks for Dejounte Murray, 1 first round pick for Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley. That just it
It's a
doesn't
big
add up
ask.
value. So I
Yeah.
mean, just in general, it does feel like the market's resetting, and I think it's gonna have to because again, it does feel like we're gonna just see more stars just ask out of the situations. I don't know who the next one is gonna be, but we know it's coming. At some point, right? At some point this offseason, somebody's going to ask out because it's been happening every offseason. So
Yeah.
it is kind of interesting because they ratified the new CBA and apparently there's a bigger fine now for trade requests. Before it was like 50K and now it's like 100. And it's like, I mean, these guys make millions. Does it really affect them that much? Probably
Right.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all in the
Um,
perspective. That's
yeah, exactly. So I guess to just kind of move on into potential second round matchups. We don't have all of them yet necessarily. We could potentially get them by the end of the weekend. But for now, right, we got Philly, Boston, Knicks Heat in the Eastern Conference, right? So we have the two second round matchups for the Eastern Conference playoffs, and then in the West we got Nuggets Suns, and we're still kind of waiting to see who comes out of the Lakers Grizzlies Warriors Kings series.
Right.
But just in general, just kind of like, what are your early thoughts on some of those matchups? Obviously, we can't talk about all of them,
Yeah.
because they're not all set yet. But like, say for example, like Knicks Heat, what do you expect from that one?
Ooh, Knicks Heat. That's going to be a dogfight. It's going to be rough. And, we said that about Cleveland. Well, I think I said it about Cleveland and New York. Like, I thought that was going to be a dogfight. But legitimately, this one's going to be a dogfight because you got some hungry guys, guys who are looking to prove themselves. And then, obviously playoff Jimmy. I'm very curious how the Knicks are going to handle Jimmy Butler. They've got some wing defenders, but at the same time, I'm just not sure if it's going to be enough. You know what I mean? But on Miami's end, you are dealing with a hobbled, I guess, somewhat less effective version of Julius Randle. So I guess that's a plus for Miami. But at the same time, I'm very curious to see how they handle Jalen Brunson. I think that's going to be a tough ask, especially with how physical he plays. But, we could be looking at a situation where Brunson, I'm not going to say cancels Jimmy out, but, puts up some pretty big numbers as well. But I think, if you have, I don't know. It's just going to be a weird series, but I might have to give Miami the edge just because they're my dark horse. And I think, they have a little bit more experience, but I think the Knicks have a lot more hype around them. But, at the same time, you could say that for Miami. They have a lot of hype, too, considering Jimmy Butler's historic performances. But I'm going to give the Knicks the edge on this one. But I think it's going to go, like, a long ways,
Yeah.
probably like 6 or 7.
Yeah, I feel like the Knicks overall, even though they may not have the best player, I feel like they do have more overall talent.
Yes.
But we thought about, even though we thought that, with the Bucks and the Heat, and the Heat ended up winning in 5. So I probably would lean more Knicks too. Just because, like I said, I feel like they have more guys, and
Okay.
I just don't know what I'm gonna get out of some of these Miami guys, right? Because again, some of these guys have played very well. Gabe Vincent, Caleb Martin, Kevin Love, Kyle Lowry, but I just don't know what I'm gonna get out of some of those guys from night to night. And there are some nights where it's basically just Jimmy Butler or bust.
Yeah. I'm going with
So
Miami, by the way.
oh, you're going with Miami?
Yeah, I think that's what I
Oh,
said.
my bad. I thought you said
I may have misspoken, but just to clarify for you and the viewers, I'm going with Miami. So,
oh,
yeah.
okay. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that one's gonna be tough. Like I said, it almost feels like for me, like it just feels like the Knicks have more collective talent, but I do think that the Heat have the best player.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of it's going to come down to, can Butler continue to replicate his performances in the
Yes.
first round? If he can continue to do that and get at least a little help, that may be enough to push them over the top,
Right.
against the Knicks, right? Because, I don't know, like the Knicks offense, I don't know, just is kind of ugly, a little bit uglier in my opinion than the Bucks, right? And they
Sure.
don't have like a Giannis,
Exactly.
even though Brunson's very good, right? So I feel like you can make an argument for either team. I feel like right now I would lean towards Knicks, but I kind of need to see how the series is gonna go. Because it's just kind of hard to envision it. Because it's just like the Knicks won the regular season matchup, but just in general, right? Like it doesn't feel like the regular season matchups to me like really make much of a difference. Because you always have to look at the context, like in terms of who played in those matchups,
Right.
right? Maybe like somebody was on a back to back or whatever. Um, so for now, I guess we'll just have to see. Like I said, it wouldn't shock me if Miami won the series because I mean Jimmy Butler's been awesome, and if he continues to play like that, as long as they get a little bit of help, they can still win. It's just kind of comes down to like the Knicks may have more guys overall over the course of the series that can just show up
Right.
on both ends, and I just kind of wonder how they deal with that size situation because the
For
Knicks
sure.
do have a lot of size and a lot of physicality, um, and the Heat other than Bam, they don't really have any other like big athletic guys, and he's not, he's 6'9", so he's not really that big,
No.
right? Like Kevin Love isn't the same, was never a great defender, right? But
Right.
outside of taking charges, right, he's not really going to give you a whole lot defensively,
Yeah.
right? Cody Zeller's not going to give you a whole lot defensively, so I just wonder how the Heat match, the size. Because we know the Heat can be physical, but just in general, right? Like it just looks like a completely different team than in the regular season. Because
Yes.
they struggled on offense so much during the regular season, but so far in these playoffs, I mean, most of the games they've had have been relatively high scoring.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I do kind of wonder, how that goes. I think it'll be a really fun series, and like you said, I think whoever wins, it'll be like a dogfight, of tough, physical series. Probably a lot number of close games, where it comes down to a few plays at the end. So we'll just have to see. But
Yeah.
moving on into the next one. In the East, we got, Philly, Boston. I think we both probably feel like Boston's going to win that series.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it'll be close. Obviously, you have to factor in that Philly has gotten some rest. But again, it kind of hinges on the health of Embiid and the health of Harden,
Yes.
to me, right? Because if those guys aren't, as healthy as they can be, I think it's going to be really tough for them to beat Boston. Obviously, Embiid's got the size advantage, but then
Right.
Boston has the advantage on the wings, right? With Tatum and Brown, I don't think Philly really has an answer for either of those guys. So I think a lot of it's just like you said, going to come down to right, Tatum and Brown. How well do they play? Right? Can they kind of close games? Can they get stops better than they did against Atlanta? And then for Philly, right, it just kind of comes down to again, can the other guys outside of Embiid give you a whole lot, right? Because like I said, I think Harden has to be on his A game in order for them to win. I just feel like if he's kind of a shell of himself, I don't really see Philly being able to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So to me, that's kind of the key. But Philly has an opportunity right now with Milwaukee going out, to potentially, take out Boston and come out of the East. So to me, right, if you're Philadelphia, you got to take advantage of this opportunity and do whatever you can. Because if they beat Boston, right, then I think they have a good shot to come out of the West and maybe win. Oh, excuse me, come out of the East and
Yeah.
maybe win it all. So, again, I would lean towards Boston as well. I think it's been kind of a shaky first round performance for them
For sure.
against the Hawks. But again, matchups are different, right? So again, the way you play against one matchup might be completely different. Because I remember the Spurs, I think it was in 2014. They beat the Miami Heat, right? But they beat them in 5 games, right? And that was, the last year of the Big Three. But their toughest matchup was actually the first round against the Dallas Mavericks, right? Where it
Yep.
was like, an aging Dirk Nowitzki, aging Vince Carter. That series went 7 games.
Yeah.
So, just, again, matchups kind of dictate, how well you can play in the playoffs. But in order to win a championship and win multiple rounds, you got to beat different types of teams, right? So
Exactly.
even though obviously matchups, can dictate how well or how poorly you can play, got to get through all of them if you want to win the title. So to me, can Philly beat, a team constructed like Boston? I think Brooklyn kind
No.
of gave them a little bit of a blueprint, but
Yeah.
right, for Boston, right, Brown and Tatum are much better, right, than say like Mikal Bridges, Cam
Yeah.
Johnson,
For
Spencer
sure.
Dinwiddie. So I think
For
that's
sure.
kind of the factor that you have to look at, right? And again, their first round matchup against the Nets, even though it was a sweep, it wasn't really that impressive because the Nets to me are not that great of a team, and a lot of those games were still relatively close. So I don't know, I don't know how long that series is going to go, but I would lean towards Boston because I do feel like I would probably trust them, in close games more than I would Philly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, for me, the keys to victory for both teams, Philly, supporting cast has to come through, show out, ball out, etc. And then for Boston, like I said, the main stars, especially Tatum, I don't want to put too much pressure on him, but I have to. He's got a ball out as well. So, if Tatum takes over the series, I think Celtics win. But, at the same time, if Philly's supporting cast outshines Boston's, then we're into a problem and Philly can potentially win this series. So, but like I said, I'm going with Boston. I have a little bit more faith in Tatum than I do Philly's supporting cast, just based on the evidence that I've seen over all their
Yeah.
careers and this regular season and the playoffs. So that's what I'm going with.
hmm And then, I guess out in the Western Conference, right? We only have one series
Yeah.
or one second round matchup. We got Nuggets, Suns, right? Obviously, the Nuggets were the number one seed in the Western Conference. It is kind of funny because again, even though they're the number one seed, it doesn't feel like anybody really has a whole lot of faith. Um, in their chances of winning. Obviously, with the Suns, right, you got, the hot new team, right, with Kevin Durant, Devin Booker. They took care of the Clippers in 5.
Yep.
Honestly, didn't really look that great, right,
No.
considering, no Kawhi for all but 2 games, right? Paul George didn't play at all, and a lot of the games were close. I still would probably lean towards Phoenix in this series just because I just feel like for Denver, you know, they don't have a lot of rim protection. Obviously Jokic, I think his defense has improved, and I think so far in the first round, you saw him make more of an effort defensively. And I think Denver as a team, is capable of playing high level defense, but I just don't know how Denver really, answers, that starting 5 for Phoenix in terms of right. Devin Booker, right, has been great
Right.
so far this postseason, right? Kevin Durant has slotted in really well, playing pretty well alongside Booker. So I do kind of wonder, what Denver does defensively for that. I think that, but I also think that Denver does have some advantages in terms of some physicality, some force around the basket, right? With Jokic, with Aaron Gordon, right? They do have some good athletes. They can play up and down, right? Whereas Phoenix, play likes to play at a little bit of a slower pace.
Right.
They don't take a ton of threes, or they're more of like a mid-range team, right? Skilled team offensively, whereas the Nuggets like to get up a ton of threes. I still think it's a close series. Like I said, I've kind of gone back and forth. I still would probably lean Phoenix, but it wouldn't shock me if Denver won the series because I do have concerns about Phoenix's depth and them having to play 40 plus minutes every night. Um, even though Denver doesn't really have, the greatest bench in the world either, I do think they have a couple more guys that you can probably trust. But I just feel like with Denver, I just think it's going to be really hard for them to contain Booker and Durant. And I think Aiton, is another X factor where I think Jokic is a guy that he can probably play relatively well against.
Yeah.
Right. I think Zubac, right, is a better defensive big than Jokic.
Yeah.
And
For
again,
sure.
Jokic is not a bad defender.
No.
But I just think Aiton, I think, can kind of, match him. Not necessarily offensively, but I don't think Aiton's going to shrink in this series, the way he might against, maybe some other bigs. So I feel like I have to lean Phoenix, but I don't feel great about it. And it wouldn't shock me if Denver won just because they have home court advantage and they're great at home. One of the best teams at home in the NBA. But I think Phoenix could probably take one. But it all just comes down to, right, again, like, is fatigue going to play a factor for the Suns? Because, again, they're playing heavy minutes, and that shouldn't happen in a first round matchup against, a shorthanded team, right? Like, you shouldn't have to play, Durant and Booker 40 plus minutes a night, against Russell Westbrook and Norman Powell. But I'm still going to lean towards Phoenix because I think that they're going to have two of the top players in the series. And I just think defensively, I think Denver's going to really struggle to contain those guys. But it wouldn't shock me if Denver won. I think this should be a close series.
Yeah. I think it's going to go probably around 6-7. And honestly, I think it's because Phoenix is probably going to struggle against Jokic, but I'm sure they're going to figure out a way to stop him and also mitigate, his supporting cast. But then in respect to Phoenix, I just don't know if Denver's going to have an answer, numbers wise for what Devin Booker and Kevin Durant are going to do combined. But burnout is real. So, it wouldn't surprise me if the Nuggets do end up coming out of this series, but I'm taking Phoenix on this one. But I'm really curious how the Nuggets are going to pick their poison because Devin Booker wants them to double him. He wants to be doubled so he can get the ball to Durant. He said that literally, like I think a couple days ago. He said, he wants to get Durant the shot, but teams are going to have to pick their poison because who do you want to go off more, Durant or KD, or Durant or Devin Booker? Wow, holy brain fart.
You're not the first person to do that. I've heard other people.
Yeah. So, who do you want? Who do you want to go off more? So that's the issue. But like you said, I think the biggest thing is definitely DeAndre Ayton. He's their X factor because I think he has some potential to also explode for a big game, especially if him and Chris Paul can get the pick and roll going. Even him and Kevin Durant. I'm curious to see how they take advantage of Jokic's. He's not a bad defender, but he's also not as good as Zubac, like you said. So I'm curious to see how they take advantage of that, I guess, somewhat weakness. But I just feel like the Nuggets are going to have no defensive answer for Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. But at the same time, the Suns probably aren't going to have an answer for Jokic either. So I'm curious to see how this series goes. But I'm picking Suns.
Yeah, the drop coverage defense is going to be interesting because again, like when you look at a team like Phoenix, again, they do most of their damage from the mid range. So Jokic isn't necessarily going to have to step out quite as far as he
Right.
might have to against a team like, say, the Warriors. But he's still going to have to step out away from the basket, right? And that's going to leave some open shots at the rim for some of these guys on Phoenix. So like I said, I'm looking at DeAndre Ayton to be that other guy.
Mm-hmm.
After Booker and Durant, right? Because we talked about it, right? I think for him, in order for the Suns to win, he's got to have a pretty solid series, right? Because he's again the guy, that's obviously I don't think he's going to outplay Jokic, right? But if he can have a really good series where he's averaging like I don't know 17 and 11, or 15 and 12 or
Yeah.
something like that, right? On good efficiency, just playing with force around the basket, I think they have a good chance to win. Even though again, like I don't think either team like is significantly better than the other. 'Cause,
Right.
again, Denver's been great. all year. Obviously, they kind of took it easy during the end of the regular season, but they also have the continuity factor. These guys have been playing together for years. Um, so they know where, everybody wants to be in terms of their spots. Phoenix is still kind of figuring stuff out, right? Because they've only played, 8 regular season games together, if I'm not mistaken, and then 5 playoff games together
Right.
so far. So, just obviously it's just going to take a lot of learning and adjusting on the fly. I think they can do it, but like I said, I think it's going to be tough because again, Denver's a really tough place to play, right, with the altitude. Um, and again, Denver's a great home team. And again, I think that, like you said, the burnout is going to be a factor. So if they're going to win, I think, it's important for them to, in close games, get those type of wins because you
Yeah.
don't want, if you're Phoenix, you don't want an extended series where
No.
these guys are continuing to play 45, 50 minutes,
Right.
and say like overtime game or something like that. So I don't know. Like I said, I'm going to lean towards Phoenix, but not by a lot. And I don't feel great about it.
Yeah. It's going to be a wild one. That's definitely the series that I have, marked on my calendar for the second round.
Yeah. So, again, we don't really have the other Western Conference matchup yet, so we're pretty much just gonna wrap it up by going into the news segment. Um, Not too many things to talk about. Obviously, Ime Udoka, right, was hired by the Houston Rockets. He's the next coach, replacing Steven Silas.
Mm-hmm.
Who wasn't brought back, obviously, right? A tough time in Houston, right, the last couple of years. But again, Udoka, Woe said that they did an investigation. The NBA did an investigation and didn't really find anything that would prevent him from being a head coach. I'm assuming Houston, right, probably did the same thing, right, and vetted sources and all that. But it looks like he's going to take over. Kind of a little bit surprised. I thought he would go for the Toronto job
Mm-hmm.
just because I feel like it's a better situation than the Houston job. But I also understand, like, you got to take the opportunity when you can get it, right? There may not be another opportunity, right? Maybe for a while, who knows, right? Obviously,
Right.
Toronto is still on the hunt for a new coach, and they have a lot of, names and people that they're interested in. But, I do think it's going to be interesting, right? Because he went to Boston, right? And, that team had a history, of playoff performances, right? It was a young team, right? But he went in there and I think added a level of toughness to them that I don't think that they necessarily had before that, and I feel
Yeah.
like that they're maybe missing right now. Um,
Yeah. I get that.
yeah. I do wonder if he does the same for Houston. Obviously, not the same in terms of talent, not the same in terms of guys, right? Because we know it was kind of a tumultuous time in Houston, right? We saw the clips, for example, of guys mocking Steven Silas, as they're getting on the court. So, it didn't so it didn't feel like, he necessarily may have had the respect of some of the players out
Yeah.
there.
Josh
Um,
Christopher, we're looking at you, buddy.
yeah, so, I feel like Ime Udoka probably will earn that respect more just because again, in his rookie season he took the Celtics to the finals and they was 2 games away from the title. So I feel like respect wise, right, it'll probably be better. And I think, in terms of just systems put in place, it'll probably be better. If I'm him, I just don't know if I would have taken the Houston job. Again, I understand you got to take the opportunities when they come, but I would have preferred Toronto or, I think maybe, once the offseason comes, I think a couple other options will open up, that I probably would have preferred. But again, it's a coaching gig. He didn't have one. So obviously you got to take it when you can get it. So, what do you think of the hire?
Yeah. I think he.
I think he's a good one, but
Yeah. Me
we'll
too.
see.
I think this is a great hire. And I think this works out better for Houston than it does Udoka. Because they got a great coach. I'm sure he's thankful for the opportunity, but like you said, it could have been better elsewhere. Anywhere is better than Houston in my opinion right now. But they do have some young pieces, some young talent. Josh Christopher, Jalen Green, Jabari Smith. There are some guys there that do have potential. However, it's just like is Udoka the guy to get that potential out of them? But I'm sure he's probably going to add maybe like some sort of maturity factor to this team because they just seem so immature right now. So hopefully in the offseason, they'll be able to get that out of the way. And then obviously they're going to have another pick this year in the draft. So I'm curious to see how all this goes down. But I think, if you're a Houston fan or if you're in the Houston organization, things are looking up because, Udoka's a great coach and he proved that. And I think this is a hire that you want. But like you said, there are better gigs out there for Udoka. But, I think he just had to take what he got. And it may not have been, a whole lot. But, you can't play the waiting game with a situation like he had. So, I think this is good news for both parties, but we'll see what happens. It's going to shape up to be pretty interesting, I think.
Raptors, Toronto's casting a wide net in head coaching search. And they've interviewed, Kenny Atkinson, right?
Okay.
Who's an assistant for the Warriors, Becky Hammon,
Okay.
Charles Lee, right? So a lot of names. Again, some of these people I'm not necessarily familiar with. I know some of them like Chris Quinn, Adrian Griffin, obviously Becky Hammon,
Yeah.
and Kenny Atkinson. So of some of those names, is there one that kind of jumps out to you, or do you feel like necessarily that there's not like a specific one?
I'd like Kenny. But at the same time, my issue with him is, the playoff experience isn't really there. And I think, with this Toronto team, they need somebody who's, a seasoned playoff guy. And it didn't sound like the names that you mentioned were really like playoff coaches or,
Most of
people.
them are assistants. They haven't
Exactly.
really had a head
So,
coaching gig.
so I'm not too sure about that. But I think, if the Warriors do win the title this year, then I'm sure Atkinson will probably take the Toronto job. But I'd have to pick Atkinson just because probably that's the one that I'm the most familiar with. Hammond's a good choice too. I think she deserves an opportunity to be the head coach somewhere. I think that would probably shape up to be pretty interesting. I always
Yeah,
thought that she was going to get the mantle or Popovich was going to hand the mantle down, but it is what it is.
Yep.
So
yeah, he's still coaching. The
yeah,
Atkinson one, it was kind of funny because he was supposed to coach the Hornets last year, and then there was like that big scenario where he accepted the offer and then essentially reneged,
right.
and then went back to being a Warriors assistant. So I do kind of wonder, if he's going to get another opportunity. I mean, I guess his name popped up, kind of like you said, right? It seemed like he did a decent job, with some young teams that were kind of
Right.
rebuilding once it was playoff time. Didn't necessarily do a whole lot. Um, Hammond is the only one I think of those, right, that actually has head coaching experience, although she's been a WNBA head coach.
Yeah.
Just won the championship with the Las Vegas Aces.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, again, it'll be interesting to see, if that can carry over into the NBA. Obviously, she was an NBA assistant. But just in general, right, I do kind of wonder who they end up picking. Just because again, right, the situation with Nick Nurse was just interesting because he won a title with them a few seasons ago. But it just felt like it just didn't work. He didn't, it seemed like there was some issues with him and the players, and it was time to move on. So I do kind of wonder, who they decide to start over with. And, a lot of those names I think are decent names, but we'll just have to see.
Yeah. I'm going Atkinson all the way.
Yeah. And then another rumor, Budenholzer's status shaky. Sham says there's a feeling of shock and embarrassment in Milwaukee after losing to the Heat. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think he should be on the hot seat. I think his performance in the first round was pretty poor.
It was abysmal.
Yeah, pretty abysmal. Again, we talked about it in the earlier part of the podcast. It wouldn't shock me if they let him go. Even though I do think he won, he did coach them to a title, right? But then, you look around and we saw other coaches, with the same, have the situation happen to them, right? Frank Vogel coached the Lakers to a title. He's fired 2 seasons later. Right? Nick Nurse, we just mentioned, right? Won the Raptors title, fired a few seasons later. So, I mean, it's pretty clear, right? Right now in the league, it feels like a "what have you done for me lately" type of situation where, again, yeah, you may have won a title with us a few seasons ago, but if you don't continue to give us sustained success, get ready to learn Chinese, buddy. So I
Pretty
mean, I
much
guess
Shanghai is calling your name, boss.
yeah. So, I mean, So it's going to be interesting to see it. I guess the fact that they didn't fire him right away after that is kind of, I guess, whatever. But still, I don't think he's necessarily 100% safe. I'm not, like I said, I don't know if 50-50 is the right number, but it wouldn't shock me if they still kept him and were just like, and like I said earlier, maybe we had injuries. Things didn't go our way, so let's just give it another shot. But then it
Right.
wouldn't also surprise me if it was like Giannis was hobbled, but he was still playing. You guys still had opportunities to win, and you couldn't get it done, so you're gone. I don't know. It's just a weird situation. I'm just even like it though it's been a day after it's happened. Like I still can't get over the fact that I watched them lose back-to-back games in very similar fashion, and now they're out
Yeah.
of the first round when I picked them to win the title. Just absolutely just crazy.
Yeah. The wound is definitely still fresh. And I think that's what we're looking at here. I don't think he's safe at all. I think it's more like 70% he's fired, 30% he's safe. That's what I'm thinking. But it wouldn't surprise me either way. You know that, and you know it's interesting because once you build a championship culture, you kind of expect that to resonate in the postseason. And the coaching was just so bad, like it really makes you scratch your head, like what the hell was going
Yeah,
on. I'm sorry to curse,
it was
but like what
it
was
was
going
bad.
on, man? Like
It was bad. I was shocked at how awful it was because it just didn't make any sense as I was watching, and I'm like, how do you not call a timeout that entire run, and then you
yeah,
have an opportunity to end it on a game winner, and you still don't call a
like
timeout twice?
and even a 2K, like even the 2K computer is going to call a timeout in those situations. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So it's like
yeah,
if he couldn't do that, then that speaks volumes to me.
yeah,
And I think that raises some red flags that I'm sure the Bucks
yeah,
organization is definitely questioning keeping this guy around because it's
yeah.
rough.
Literally turned into Mike Bottenholzer. It's
Yeah,
not.
like
It's
he's a bot. He literally
yeah,
turned into a bot. Rough,
yeah,
rough, rough. Wound is so flesh.
yeah. So next rumor, or a next piece of news, a little bit more of a rumor. Knicks, Nets, Heat linked to Karl Anthony Towns, also Blazers and Pacers.
Mm-hmm.
Teams interested in him. We talked about this in our live stream. That they don't necessarily have to trade Towns, but we know, right, that obviously we can see that Edwards is the guy that Minnesota's probably going to build around, and it
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't shock me, if they eventually decided to potentially move on from him. But just in general, of the teams that I mentioned, to me, I don't know about the New York one because again, I like what they have going on, and I don't necessarily know if I want to bring him in there because it just
Right.
doesn't feel like he would fit.
Doesn't
The
match
Nets
the
one is
culture
kind
there either.
yeah, the Nets one is kind of interesting. The Heat one is kind of interesting. Blazers, Pacers, but I just don't know. I just don't know what the ideal fit for him is, because I don't think he's a number one guy.
No, not
Um,
anymore.
and he just signed like a huge contract, so he's going to be paid like a number one guy. So it just feels like if you're going to do that, like you're pretty much just committed to, probably having like a relatively low ceiling as a team. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it's not to disrespect Towns, right? I think he's a fine player, but I just don't think he's a guy at this point that you can build around, which is wild, right? Because I think a year after he was drafted, I remember the GM of surveys, he was picked as the one that everybody would want to build around, right? It was a very high percentage. And, to go from that point to, where we are now at this point in his career, it's just been kind of interesting to see. But I don't know. I mean, of all those teams mentioned, I don't think there's an ideal fit there because I feel like with most of those teams, I'm kind of okay with what I have. Maybe Portland just because,
That's what I was
you
gonna
know,
say.
yeah, maybe Portland just because Nurkic feels like he might be on the decline.
Right.
Just he just hasn't seemed like he's been able to recover from all the injuries he's had. But I don't know. Like if I'm the Knicks, like I said, I just wouldn't want to do that because I
No.
like what they have going right now. I don't think you want to, bring Towns in there. I mean,
And
maybe
it depends on what
if
they're
you want to
asking
upgrade.
for too.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you might want to upgrade, the guard or wing position. Because again, like if you didn't trade for Donovan Mitchell, I wouldn't all of a sudden decide to just trade for Karl Anthony
No,
Towns.
it's not
And
gonna
again,
work.
like yeah, and again with Brooklyn, they could go big game hunting maybe, because it's kind of a weird team, but Miami, I mean, like maybe, but again, like I just don't know. I don't like a lot of these options. Again, like the Blazers feels like maybe the best one,
Yeah.
but even then, like again, he's making like over $200 million if I'm mistaken over the next several years. So to me, I just don't think there's an ideal spot. It almost kind of feels like he's in a position similar to like Lillard or Bradley Beal, where you got guys that are making a ton of money. Um, I just don't know if there's an ideal place for them now, just given
You
how much
can't.
you would have to give up just to get that one guy.
If he was making significantly less, I would say Portland has the green light. Go ahead and get him. Because then, you're kind of getting somebody who's similar to Aldridge a little bit, but, a better 3-point shooter. So it's like, I feel like that would probably accompany Lillard's game a little bit better, especially than Nurkic right now. But, just for the money that he's being paid, it's just not worth it. And then, you'd have to always ask the question, what am I going to have to give up to get this guy? And then, with Towns now, health has come into the play with him, unfortunately, because, early in his career is pretty durable, but now it's kind of been on the decline. And then also culture, you got to factor that in. What kind of culture does Minnesota have? And then also you got to look at what other cultures, or what other teams have in terms of their culture as well. And I think with the Knicks, that's the main problem. He doesn't fit that culture. I don't think Towns is a dog. You know what I mean? He's not a dog fighter. He's not, he's not going to fight tooth and nail for every bucket. You know, he has some foul trouble, health issues, like I said. And then you've already got Randall, so it's like I don't know how that would really work. And then I don't really feel comfortable pulling Mitchell Robinson either. I just don't know. It's just a weird situation. And like I said, I think he's one of those guys, or like you said, he's one of those guys where he's going to have to stay put for a while just because of the fact that he's making so much money. But, you know, are you really going to get all that back in return on a different squad for what you give up? You know, it's just not a good look.
Yeah, and again, I think we've seen like that no contract is untradeable.
Right.
And so it's obviously he could easily get traded. I don't know what the ideal fit is. So I feel like wherever
Who's
he
going to
gets
want
traded,
him?
yeah, I just feel like wherever he gets traded, if he does get traded, like you're not gonna feel great about it. I mean, like you might feel good about it for like 5 minutes, and then once you actually see it in action, not gonna be great.
Yeah.
Um,
Go Bear.
yeah, exactly. And then to wrap it up, Kawhi, Paul George contract extensions discussed by Lawrence Frank. Right, Lawrence Frank is the guy that is the president of basketball operations for the Clippers. This one is kind of interesting just because from the perspective of Kawhi and Paul George, now they're into their 30s. They just haven't been able to stay healthy. When they're healthy and they've played together, it's been fine. But just in general, I don't know if that situation's going to get better, right? Like you don't usually get into your 30s and all of a sudden, you had injury issues before, and now you get better. And, we didn't know at the time, right? Because it had been talked about, after our live stream, the next day. But Kawhi has a torn meniscus.
Yeah, I heard about
That
that.
was the reason why. Yeah, exactly. And that was the reason why he didn't play. So that's another long-term injury, that I guess is going to keep him out probably for most of the offseason. I don't know, when he'll be back. I'm assuming he'll be
Right.
ready for the start of next season. But just in general, right, that's back-to-back, pretty significant injuries for him. Obviously, George was able to avoid significant injury. But again, just another season where those two guys miss a significant amount of time and you end up not really getting to do much of anything. So just, at this point, they gave up a lot to get those guys, right? Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, along with, several draft picks.
Right.
Obviously, at the time, you do it 10 times out of 10, right? Because at that time, right, Kawhi was, and, still is, one of the best players in the league. You put that together with Paul George, that should be, a legitimate team. But at this point, it just hasn't worked. I mean, again, when they're on the court, right, it's fine, right? But they haven't won anything and they've barely been able to stay on the court. So, I don't know. Like to me, I would potentially like, explore trades for those guys
Okay.
maybe, but it's also going to be tough because, again, though, Kawhi's making a lot of money and, again, you just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, like the fact that we didn't know that this was a torn meniscus until after the series is over is just crazy, right? I feel like, with most other stars, we would know
Off rip.
pretty much immediately after,
Yeah.
they figure it out. So it's just so strange. It's just been such a strange tenure with those guys. And I just, if I'm the Clippers, I just feel like a lot of frustration because I just don't know what you do. Because
Yeah.
again, they're talented guys, but they just can't seem to stay healthy. And then you just don't know what to do with Kawhi because it just feels like, you don't know when he's going to play. And you just don't, and, it just feels like there's a lot of privacy. And I don't know what you do with that. Like,
Yeah.
again, those guys are awesome players, but again, they barely play and we don't know when they're going to play. Not so much with Paul George, but just in general, right? Like both of those guys get hurt a lot. They're getting older, and it just feels like you're going to just start to get diminishing returns on those guys. Obviously, their games are games, that I think because they shoot really well, it should age relatively well. But again, like I don't see them getting healthier as they get older.
No.
So I just don't know what you do with that situation.
Yeah. Injuries never leave you. And that's what's really hurt that squad over the years, durability. It's kicked them in the butt multiple times. And like for me, I want to agree with you on the trade thing, but I have to say, like, for what you gave up, you kind of have to keep them around, especially, with how much they're getting paid. Like, I don't know. It's just such a bad situation.
I get
I
that.
feel like the Clippers kind of scam themselves, if you know what I mean? But because like you said, with Kawhi, it's always something so weird. Like he's always taking time away, load managing, whatever, privatized. Like you said, he lives a private life. Like a lot of people don't know what's going on with him. You get stuff gets disclosed so late, and it's like, if we would have known this earlier, maybe, we wouldn't have said some things. You know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to get at? Like, it's just weird. But in
Yeah.
regards to Paul George, I think you kind of have to keep him around too. But I don't know. It's rough because, like you said, they haven't had success. They haven't won anything. So it's like I don't know. It's just such a sense of like false hope. But you kind of want to
Yeah.
rely on these guys because they're so good when they are healthy. But problem is they're
Right.
never healthy. So I don't know what's going to go down with that. That's one to watch too. But
Yeah.
Clippers have been a
And
disaster for the past few years.
yeah, and with the new CBA, being ratified, it's going to be harder for these teams that spend a lot of money, to keep improving the roster, right? Because there's a lot more penalties, for going deep into the luxury tax. You're not going to be able to, spend a certain amount of money to sign certain players, right? I
Yeah.
think you lose draft picks potentially. I think maybe second round picks, if your salaries are too high. So it's just and right, and the Clippers, along with the Warriors, right, they're two of the highest paying or biggest salary teams in the NBA. So it's just I think it's it's gonna continue to be hard for those teams to figure out how to rebuild. And right, obviously with the Warriors, they've had a ton of success, right?
Yeah.
But you haven't seen that yet with the Clippers. Um, so I just don't know what you really do about that. I think that's a really tough situation to be in because again, they're very talented
Yeah.
players, right? But they're just never available, and you don't know when they're going to be available.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just like again,
It's a
but
sticky
I understand.
situation, man.
Yeah, and I understand like what you're saying, right? Where it's like you kind of made your bed, so now you kind of have to sleep on it because like it may hurt you more if you try to force your way out of it versus just like sticking through it, right? But they gave Kawhi an extension. I think they gave Paul George an extension, so those guys are still going to be under contract for a while. So that's going to be an interesting situation to keep an eye on, right? Because I think
Yeah.
we talked about it earlier in the season where if they don't get it done again, they should there should be some big changes. I think that there are potential changes coming for that team even if those guys don't go anywhere, it wouldn't shock me if some of the other guys on the roster are gone, just
Yeah.
because again, like the amount of money, that the team costs in terms of the salaries and the lack of flexibility. It wouldn't surprise me if they just move on from a bunch of those guys and just bring in the new faces
Yeah.
just to keep the team competitive. Because
I get that.
like you said, yeah, you might just be in a situation where you might just have to kind of just find a way to keep this going as long as you can, and just
Yeah.
kind of like eat the cost. It might already just be a sunk cost at this point,
I
right?
feel
Because
like you
Shea
have to
Gill,
wait for. Sorry to cut you off, but I feel like you have to wait for them to ask out in this situation, honestly. Um, but how long is that going to be? But I don't know. It's just such a mess over there. But
yeah,
continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
mean, Shea Gilgeous Alexander, Jalen Williams, and I mean, again, right? Like, obviously, in hindsight, like I said, you do the trade, right? Because you knew what you were getting out of those guys. We didn't
Right.
know what we were getting out of Shea Gilgeous Alexander and future picks. So I'm not gonna, harp on them, and say like they made a mistake to get those guys. But sometimes you just have to understand what you're getting yourself into, right? Like say with Brooklyn, right? They got into the situation where they brought in Kyrie Irving, they brought in Durant, and they brought in Harden, and it didn't work. Right. And now, they're kind of in a weird situation now where they got, some decent young guys, but they're also just in a weird situation where they're just not going to be that relevant now, right? And
Exactly.
they spent a lot of money to get those guys, and they had nothing to show for it, right? For basically 1 year. So, I mean, just a weird situation. And I do kind of wonder how the Clippers get out of it. I think overall, Lawrence Frank has done a good job in terms of putting a lot of talent and depth with that roster. It's just a shame that we just never get to see it together
Nope.
because these guys are just never available. But
Yeah.
overall, I still think that front office has done a good job. It's
Me
just kind
too.
of a matter of can they ever get some type of luck going?
They need to
Because
win.
it just feels like because it just feels like that franchise might just be cursed at this
Literally.
point.
Literally.
I mean, yeah, I mean, like you go back to previous years, right? Because like back in like the '70s and '80s, it was more just kind of like ineptitude from the front office and ownership, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in the last like 15 years, it just feels like just bad luck, right? Guys getting injured or teams blowing 3-1 leads. I mean, just in
Yeah.
general, like I mean, I just don't know what you can do about that. I mean, it's been all bad luck, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what you can do about that, right? I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah. It's been a rough ride for them. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know what they can do to mitigate that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes again. It was another long one.
Yeah.
But hopefully, everybody was able to enjoy, the content we put out. Again, we appreciate those who showed out for the live stream. We're going to continue to potentially do some more, right? Again, as probably when the second round starts up is probably when we'll
Oh
do
yeah.
our next one. Um, But just in general, thanks for all the support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you Monday.